You have just read about the differences between teaching a class and managing a class, and about why it's important to keep students engaged. As you watch this video, keep the following questions in the back of your mind. What's the difference between a norm and rules? Why is it important to have a class culture instead of just a collection of rules? Anytime you have a lot of people in one room, there will be a little bit of chaos. This is even more true when working with younger students. As a teacher, you're responsible for making sure your students are paying attention to the material and engaging with it, as this is the only way they will learn. This is no easy task. And when you have energetic students and students who don't behave the way you'd like them to, it's easy to fall into the trap of spending all your time managing the classroom. That is, shepherding your students, trying to get them to follow the rules, pay attention, and be less disruptive. In this video, we will look at a few ways that you can move away from spending your time managing the class and devote more time to quality teaching. The best way to create an engaging learning environment is to focus on the culture of the classroom instead of on how you are going to manage it. It is important to have rules in place and to express your expectations in terms of behavior, use of class time, staying on task, treatment of fellow students, approaches to learning, and so on. But all of these can be projected through the culture you design in your classroom. Start by creating a set of classroom norms. That is, behaviors and practices that anyone who sets foot into your classroom can be expected to follow. These are different than rules. An example of a rule might be no cell phones in class. But an example of a norm might be treat one another with respect. Rules are generally set and enforced by the teacher, but norms are often set by the students themselves, either explicitly or through repeated behavior. In other words, norms can come into being on their own. And if a student works against those norms, it's just as likely that she will be lightly scolded by her peers instead of by a teacher alone. In this way, students become responsible for managing their own learning. Norms work together to create a classroom culture. Culture means the shared behaviors and beliefs of the class. The best class cultures are positive, encouraging, and promote creativity and experimentation on the part of your students. You want to be careful not to wind up with a classroom culture that makes students feel suffocated and afraid to speak up. One way to make sure the classroom culture is a positive one is for you yourself to embody the traits you want to see. Be positive and encouraging. Promote creativity and experimentation. Your students will see this behavior and naturally start to emulate it. And even students who tend to misbehave or ignore your rules will have a hard time ignoring the norms their friends and peers have created. You can't simply tell students that a class culture will be a certain way. Remember, culture is more organic, and it has to be shaped by the students as well as by you. But here are a few tips you can use to make sure that your culture grows in a positive direction. Talk with your students to understand their ideal classroom culture, and then work backwards from that goal alongside your students to find ways to get there. Students will be more likely to follow a set of norms that they help create. Figure out in advance what will happen if students go against the norms and make sure you have the buy-in of all the students. This way, if you have to enforce some sort of disciplinary behavior, your students will know that it is being done fairly and with their consent. Look for patterns in the kinds of situations where you see students working against the norms and find creative and positive ways to stop the problem before it starts. For example, if you notice your students tend to speak to one another disrespectfully, or get too loud when you ask them to switch from one activity to another, have your students sing a song during this time. The music will capture their concentration and make them feel they are playing a game, leaving no time for disruptions. Think about how you want your students to interact with each other. Create opportunities for students to get to know each other and participate in a wide range of conversations. Teaching active listening skills can help students interact in a more respectful and productive way. Modeling active listening and self-talk are ways through which you can demonstrate your expectations to your students. Make sure that you praise your students for interacting in collaborative ways. The best way to develop classroom culture is by presenting models of what positive interaction looks like, sounds like, and feels like. Let's review. In this lesson, you learned the difference between managing the classroom and creating a classroom culture. You learned that managing the classroom oftentimes relies on rules and that rules are created by you, the teacher, as a way to regulate behavior. Norms, meanwhile, are behaviors and practices that anyone who sets foot in the classroom can be expected to follow. Norms are often set by the students themselves, either explicitly or through repeated behaviors. You learn that norms work together to create a class culture. Class culture refers to behaviors and beliefs of the class. The best class cultures are positive, encouraging, and promote creativity and experimentation on the part of your students. You learned a few tips for helping to shape the class culture to make sure it's positive and encouraging, including talking with your students to understand their ideal classroom culture and then work backwards from that goal. Figure out in advance what will happen if your students go against the norms, and make sure you have the buy-in of all the students. Look for patterns in the kinds of situations where you see students working against the norms, and find creative and positive ways to stop the problem before it starts. Create opportunities for students to get to know each other and participate in a wide range of conversations. Praise your students for interacting in collaborative ways, and finally, make sure you embody and always show the kinds of behaviors you want to see your students showing in the classroom. Now is a good time for you to answer the questions you were asked at the beginning of the video.